So in this example, we are not going to be graphing. Instead, we're just labeling the amplitude, period, midline, and phase shift. So I really want us to get comfortable with being able to look at a trig function and grab those four components, because those four components help you build a graph. So if you're able to extract those items, you're able to build a graph much easier. So let's start with part A here. Now, first off, I already see that it's a sine graph. So in my mind, I'm visioning that this is an S-shaped curve and there's a negative in front of it. So I can already imagine it's flipped. So it's going probably in this direction where it's going down and then back up for a maximum. So I can kind of imagine that in my head. I can also see that it's a -1 in front. So my amplitude is 1. I can see that in front of this x, the coefficient in front of it is also 1. So that is the b that we need. So our period would end up being 2 pi over 1, which is our b. And so that's just 2 pi. As you can see, anytime x has a coefficient of 1 or x is, doesn't have a number in front of it, then this is just going to be 2 pi for the period. So nothing fancy. As for the midline, there is nothing outside of the sign or parentheses. Like these have numbers outside of it, but this one doesn't. So there's not a vertical shift. So my midline is sticking at y = 0. Now, the phase shift, I do have a phase shift here. There's a plus pi over 2. So if we have a plus sign in the parentheses, that means we're going left. And in this case, we are going left pi over 2. So this would move to the left. Instead of starting at 0, it would have to start at pi over 2 on the left side, which would be this side here. All right, now let's go on to part B. So part B, we have a cosine graph. So in my mind right now, I'm thinking, okay, cosine graph, we probably have some sort of U-shaped graph. I don't have to flip the graph this one, just because there's not a negative sign. My amplitude is 4. My period, let's see, there's a 3 in front of it, so that's my B. So if I had to find my period, I would have to do 2 pi over 3. But if I were to put it over 3, I can't really simplify 2 pi over 3. So this is the most that I can simplify. So my period is 2 pi over 3. My midline here looks like there's a positive 3 on the outside. So that means I would go up if I had a positive sign. So if I go up to, instead of y = 0, this is going to be y = 2 because I went up 2 units vertically. All right, the next one here is the phase shift, and this is the part that people struggle with. So let me break this down to you guys. A lot of people will look at this problem and see the minus pi over 5 and write it as right pi over 5 because this is a negative sign, which they're correct. If there's a negative sign, this should be going to the right. But they will write pi over 5 here because they see a pi over 5. But the thing is, we have to consider that 3 that's next to it, the x. Because if you look back at our formula in graphing trigs, you'll notice that b is factored out of the x and the h, or the number that's attached to the minus or plus sign. So if we want to factor out b, let's take a look here. So our b is 3. If I were to factor out a 3, I'm basically dividing out a 3 from the x, and I'm dividing out a 3 from the negative pi over 5. Well, that would leave me with x here, because that would cancel, and drop down the minus sign. Pi over 5 divided by 3 would just be pi over 5 times 1/3. And so that would be pi over 15. Basically, anytime you're dividing and you have a fraction, you just multiply the denominator by that number. So in this case, I really have a pi over 15 in the denominator, which makes sense. If you think about this here, 3 times x gives you, let me erase this part so we can see it again. So 3 times x is 3x. 3 times pi over 15 would be pi over 5 because the 3 would cancel out with the 15, giving you the 5. So this kind of shows you how the 3 is distributed. So we can see this is right pi over 15 once you factor out the b value or the 3. So that's kind of tricky, but we'll practice it with part C as well. So for part C, I have a sine graph. So I'm already imagining an S-shaped curve, but there's a negative sign. So that tells me it would have been flipped, kind of like our first picture here. But our amplitude is still going to be positive pi, which is interesting to have as an amplitude, but you can. We do have a vertical shift, so there's a -2 here. So not at y equals 0. Instead, it's going to go down 2. So this is going to be at y equals -2. And now let's find our period. So our period is going to be BP, and our B is pi over 3. So that's going to be 2 pi over 3. So if I were to work this out, this would be 2 pi times 3 over pi, which I think I've done this before. The pi's cancel out, and 2 times 3 is 6. So my period here is 6. For the phase shift, this is where I need to factor out this b value. So if I were to factor out pi over 3, that would leave me with x, but I would have to also factor it out of pi over 9. And so I have to think about this for a sec. First off, if I factor out a pi, there should not be a pi here left. I think this should be, I want a 9 in the denominator, right? So if I made this 1/3, this would work, because pi times 1 is pi. 3 times 3 gives me 9, and so this would work. Now, if you're not comfortable trying to kind of guess and check, and what I'm doing is not just guessing and checking, I'm being pretty strategic, because I notice there's a pi here, and I've already pulled out a pi, so I can put this as a 1. I notice there's a 9 down here, and I divide it out of 3, so I have to think about the number that it can multiply to make a 9. But if you're not comfortable doing that, then you can do it the old-fashioned way, where you take the number, so pi over 9, and divide it by the number that you're pulling out, so pi over 3. If you were to do that, you would have to flip the fraction, so 3 over pi, and so the pi's cancel out when you multiply. This would be 3 over 9, and 3 over 9 is 1/3, so I got the same number down here. So if you need to do it the old-fashioned way, feel free to do that. And so I now see that this is minus 1/3. The minus sign tells me this goes right, and it goes right 1/3. And that's it for this problem here. We are able to find all 4 components. And so I could easily graph this if I wanted to. All right, that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to graph the trig function, but this time we're going to graph all 4 different types of shifts: amplitude, period, midline, and phase shift. All right, see you guys in the next video.